In just 13 years, the annual Zik lecture series has grown to such extent that it has become a major calendar highlight in Nigeria and beyond, lending perspectives and clarity to many social, political, and economic issues. So you can imagine why I did not have to think twice before accepting to chair this occasion. Indeed, the mere fact of being considered as potential chair for this event itself is a huge honor to me. The profile of Zik lecture series is underlined by the stature of the personalities it has attracted over the years. The list includes former President of Ghana, His Excellency Jerry Rawlings, former President of Tanzania, His Excellency Benjamin Mkapa, former President of Sierra Leone, Dr. Bai Koroma, former Prime Minister of Kenya, His Excellency Raila Odinga, Nigeria former Vice President, His Excellency Atiku Abubakar, former Commonwealth Secretary General, Chief Emeka Anyoko, and the list goes on. This year's lecture series follows a similar and consistent pattern, with the very eminent Dr. Mohammed Ibn Chambers, whose resume is an inspiring tale of excellence. With a background that straddles law, diplomacy, academics, and politics, Dr. Chambers is clearly a fitting choice. And the theme also for this year's lecture is apt: Zik's legacies and the rising social movements in Africa and rethinking African integration. So I thank the organizers of the annual Zik lecture series and commend them for helping to keep the remarkable memory of Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe alive. I commend the benefactor, also High Chief Dr. Ben Ndiobi Ojelibo Ndibo, for his great insight. Equally worth commending is the passion demonstrated by the university community, ably led by the Vice Chancellor, the Dean of Social Sciences Faculty, indeed other members of the university, the announcers, Professor Uche Victor Ebeze, who is the chairman of the planning committee of this Zik lecture series. Professor Nkemdilim Nnonyelu, also the advisor of the Zik lecture series. Of course, the candor and dignity that Professor Uche Azikiwe projects has been no less remarkable. One of the greatest legacies of Dr. Nnamdi Benjamin Azikiwe is his profound power of life, his profound power of the mind, his philosophies his life philosophies till today they still resonate as the path to tread in bringing succor to many Africans' challenges. So to prepare for this engagement, I have sought to refresh my memory on Dr. Azikiwe's philosophies by reading a few of his books. And I must say that I am amazed at how the ideas espoused therein speak so eloquently, even to the present times. Quite remarkably, his prescient thoughts also mirror the theme of today's lecture. I was particularly struck by his postulations on what he called the New Africa Goal. He encapsulated this in what he called a recapitulation of basic human rights in philosophical and sociological terms, which means, when broken to their brass tacks, sacrifices by the ruling elites. He saw this as a path towards the continental resurgence, wherein Africa would be liberated from the social and economic factors of poverty, where the cost of living would be reasonable and the standard of living above the minimum subsistence level. The African mind liberated from the shackles of ignorance, since the satisfaction of these conditions implies freedom to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is easy to agree that his thoughts and activism represent some vivid benchmark against which many contemporary political developments could be weighed. How interesting it would have been if we could catch a glimpse of the great Zig's thoughts regarding Africa's and indeed the world's current state of affairs. Would he be indifferent, satisfied, or disappointed? What we assume his reaction might have been would reflect the degree to which we have studied the political philosophy of Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, whose 120th posthumous birthday the lecture today commemorates. When the Nigerian youth movement, of which Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe had been a prominent member, was founded in 1934, the total estimated population of Nigeria was a little over 20 million. That figure included the mandate territories of the Cameroons. Zig was barely 30 years at the time. Its founder, Professor Eyo Ita, had just turned 30. Other founding members of the Nigerian youth movement, regarded as Nigeria's first genuine nationalist organization, were roughly of that age bracket. Established to foster the country's political advancement and enhance the socio-economic status of Nigerian citizens. Members pursued the organization's goals via pamphlets and newspapers distribution of these pamphlets at rallies and whatnot. So they employed the traditional platform then of communication. Today, with a population of over 200 million, an incredible, enormous youth bulge, a new kind of social movement has emerged, aided by the tools of the social media. They are young, tech-savvy, and almost always ready to flaunt a leadership style that is largely amorphous. The angst of these movements may not be fueled by the kind of idealism that birthed the independence movements of the 1940s and the 1950s, or the tussles over military rule of the 1970s and the 1980s. But their motivation may yet be deemed quasi-idealistic, as evident, of course, in the EndSARS protests of 2020. But by and large, the root of these angst are economic, as the recent protests in Kenya and Nigeria clearly showed. Across Africa, the angst of the youth is increasingly being felt. This speaks to the urgent need to create vibrant and inclusive economies that would banish the sense of alienation amongst the youth, which to a large extent fits the desperation behind the perilous journeys to Europe via the Mediterranean and other routes. The great Zeke may have gone the way of all mortals, but his ideas remain mortal. Zeke's ubiquitous influence meant that he didn't just belong to his immediate family, neither to his Onitsha kinsmen and women, nor indeed Nigeria. He was Zeke of Africa, a fitting moniker indicative of his pan-Africanism commitment. Zeke was convinced that a united and integrated Africa would foster economic cooperation and development. Such ideas reflected in his writings in the Accra-based African Morning Post, which, by the way, he edited from 1935 to 1937, and in his books such as The Renaissance Africa, The Future of Pan-Africanism, and The Realities of African Unity. Through his journalism and his books, he laid bare a philosophy that more or less prefigured the ideals that inspired the founding of the Organization of African Unity in May 1963. 60 years after that decade of optimism, can we say we are witnessing the strengthening or the unraveling of continent-wide and regional integration? Even the most optimistic in this hall will shudder in contemplating the prospect of ECOWAS after the withdrawal of Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger from the regional economic bloc. Indeed, it's hard not to ponder the fate of integration on the continent when a businessman from Lagos intending to travel to Freetown, for instance, may have to embark on a circuitous journey via Europe to do so. The African Continental Free Trade Area is a bright spark on the horizon, but so much still needs to be done. Africa's population is expected to reach 2.5 billion by 2050, which represents a doubling of its current population. The continent's youth population is also projected to reach 850 million in that same period. This could be an asset but it can also be a keg of gunpowder. It would be an asset if there is a sustained investment to grow Africa's human capital. However, a nightmare scenario could beckon if the burgeoning youth population sees no job prospects that are commensurate to the rich resources across the continent. Zeke's appeal wasn't just in regard to the fact that he was broad-minded. He was a beacon of selflessness and understood quite clearly that public office essentially meant service to the people. There was never any hint of hubris in his life. He devoted his life to building an inclusive society. And he didn't just pay lip service to that. He demonstrated that commitment through his actions. For example, it was under Zeke's watch as leader of the NCNC that Malam Umaru Altin, a Fulani, emerged as the first mayor of Enugu. It is instructive that he gave his support to a settler from Sokoto than to a fellow Easterner. We should be inspired by such ennobling ideals, especially in the times we live in. Through his exemplary life committed to service, Dr. Azikiwe kindled the flame that lit the path that generations have walked. The challenge for the coming generations is to keep the embers of that flame alive. I have no doubt that an event such as this has the capacity to do just that. In closing, I would like to say that it is clear to me that applying the core messages of Zeke's ideal would go a long way to putting Africa on a path towards resurgence, whereupon we would at last be able to leverage integration across the continent. This would at last enable Africa to obtain credible capacity to negotiate with its huge, youthful population and significant material resources with the rest of the world. With this, Africa will at last move away from the subsistence level to real quantum growth, while freedom from the shackles of poverty and ignorance will be an icing on the cake. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, I have said enough, and you have heard enough from me, right? I do not intend to take on the role of the guest lecturer. That task will eminently be discharged by the very cerebral Dr. Chambers, African Union High Representative and former President of ECOWAS, former United Nations Secretary General, Special Representative. Thank you all for listening. God bless you.